I still think about geometry. 27 years behind the scope, and what keeps me up isn't the emergencies, the near misses, the go-arounds, the guy who busted his altitude by 2,000 feet over Akron. It's geometry. 6 dots on a screen, arranged in a shape that had no business existing at flight level 290 over Lake Erie in the middle of November. I need to back up. Cleveland Center, 2004. I'd been there since '89. Transferred up from a Class D tower in Dayton, where the most exciting thing that happened was a Cessna 172 who couldn't find the field in haze. I wanted traffic, I wanted the scope. Cleveland gave me both. Great Lakes crossing traffic, the cargo push, O'Hare arrivals stacking up on the west side of the airspace. I worked my way through the low sectors, the departure sectors, and eventually settled on the lake sectors. Sectors 46 and 47. Overwater. People thought I was crazy. The lake sectors were boring, long stretches of nothing, especially on the overnight. No terrain to worry about, no obstructions, no VFR clutter, just altitude and procedure and the slow rotation of the sweep. But that's what I liked about it. Overwater was clean. If something painted on your scope over Lake Erie, it was real. No ground returns, no false targets bouncing off cell towers or grain elevators, just sky. November 14th. I plugged in at 200. Dave Kessler gave me the position brief. 43 targets in the airspace, most of them high-altitude overflights. FedEx push out of Memphis was winding down. A couple of UPS heavies still climbing out of Louisville. Delta had some repositioning traffic heading to DTW. Lake effect snow was building south of Erie. I could see it on the scope, a bright smear of weather returns hugging the southern shore. Normal for November. The ATS was calling ceiling broken at 4,000, visibility 5 and snow showers, winds 270 at 25, altimeter 2978. Dave pulled his headset off and rubbed the indent behind his ear. All yours, nothing weird. He grabbed his coffee and headed for the break room. I settled in, got the picture. The scope was the old stars display, green on black, data blocks drifting with their targets, the sweep line rotating every 12 seconds. The ARSR-4 out of Erie was feeding clean. Mansfield backup was solid. I could smell the coffee from the break room. It had been on the burner since second shift, burnt enough to strip paint. The building had that 3 a.m. feel, quiet. The strip printer would chatter once in a while, someone's flight plan activating and then silence. I worked the traffic, routine. FedEx 417 Heavy Cleveland Center, radar contact, climb and maintain flight level 350. Climb and maintain 350, FedEx 417 Heavy. Delta 6224 Cleveland Center, radar contact, fly heading 040, vectors for traffic. Expect direct dryer in 10 miles. Heading 040, Delta 6224. The kind of calls you make 10,000 times. The words come out of your mouth without involving your brain. You're watching the scope, watching the spacing, watching the weather. The rhythm of overnight center work, long silences broken by a position report, a frequency change, a handoff accepted, the sweep tick, the hum of the equipment, the nothing taste of your fourth coffee. At 0307, I noticed a primary return. Central Lake Erie, maybe 40 miles north-northwest of Sandusky. Flight level 290. I could estimate the altitude from the ARS-4's elevation cut, though without Mode C I couldn't be certain. No transponder, no data block, no flight plan in the system. Just a dot. I watched it for one sweep. Still there. Second sweep. Still there. And it had moved, tracking roughly east-northeast at maybe 300 knots. Consistent. Primary targets over the lake weren't unheard of. You'd get weather returns, anomalous propagation, occasionally a VFR target that the long-range radar picked up. But at FL 290, in November, over Lake Erie at 3 in the morning, nobody's flying VFR at 29,000 feet over open water and snow showers. And weather returns don't track. They bloom and fade. This was tracking. I followed procedure, watched it for a third sweep. Still consistent. Speed, heading, altitude, steady. Okay, the unidentified primary target. I'd call it in, try to raise them on guard, log it, move on. Then a second dot appeared. Same altitude, 14 nautical miles south-southeast of the first target. I measured it on the scope, used the range rings. 14 miles, exactly. And it was tracking at the same speed, same heading, same altitude estimate. Two primaries, 14 miles apart, flying in formation over Lake Erie. No transponders, no communications, no flight plans. I sat up straighter, put my coffee down, leaned into the scope. The sweep came around again. The two dots were still there, still 14 miles apart. And now I felt something cold settle in my stomach. There was a third. The third return was 14 nautical miles from both of the others, equidistant. I didn't need to measure it. I could see it on the scope. The spacing was identical. 3 dots forming a perfect equilateral triangle over Lake Erie. I watched the next sweep. A fourth return appeared, then the fifth, then the sixth. Each one materialized on a single sweep, not fading in like weather, not drifting in from outside the coverage area, just not there, then there. 6 primary returns, all at FL 290, all tracking east-northeast at 300 knots, and every single one of them was exactly 14 nautical miles from its nearest neighbors. I sat there and I counted them, counted the spacing, recounted. 6 targets arranged in a perfect hexagonal formation. I've seen formation flights on the scope. Military runs through our airspace twice a week. F-16s out of Toledo, tankers out of Rickenbacker. Formations look sloppy on radar. The spacing drifts. Pilots are human. This wasn't human. This was mathematical. And then the hexagon began to rotate. I watched it through 3 sweeps to be sure. The entire formation was pivoting around its center point, slowly, maybe 3 degrees per revolution of the sweep. The individual targets were moving along curved paths, each one maintaining its exact position within the hexagonal structure, while the whole thing turned like a wheel. I reached for the landline and called the supervisor, Gary Mullen. He was in the break room, probably half asleep. "Gary, I need you on Sector 46. Now." He came over, stood behind me. Didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. Just watched the sweep go around, watching 6 dots turn. Military? No NOTAMs, no TFR, no military activity filed anywhere over the lake tonight. ARSR acting up? Both sites are painting them. Erie and Mansfield. 6 returns, same position on both feeds. He watched another sweep. How far apart are they? 14 miles, each one. I've been watching for 10 minutes. The spacing hasn't changed by 1/10 of a mile. Gary pulled up a chair. He didn't say anything else for a while. That told me more than any words would have. Gary had been a supervisor for 19 years. If he'd had an explanation, he would have given it. I keyed guard frequency. Aircraft over Lake Erie, flight level 290, Cleveland Center on guard, squawk ident or contact 132.85, nothing. Tried twice more, nothing. No transponder activation, no mode C. 6 primary returns turning in perfect formation at 29,000 feet, and they weren't talking to anyone. I had other traffic to work. FedEx 417 Heavy was crossing the area at FL 350, tracking northeast. The primaries were at 290, 6,000 feet below. Standard separation existed. No reason to reroute. I let the FedEx go. At 3:23, FedEx 417 crossed directly over the center of the hexagonal formation, FL 350. The 6 primaries were at FL 290, 6,100 feet below. And then the 6 returns moved, not randomly, not like traffic reacting to a conflict. All 6 targets migrated inward, smoothly, simultaneously, at the same rate, converging toward a single point directly beneath the FedEx's position. The hexagon collapsed inward like a closing iris. Over 2 sweeps, 24 seconds, the 6 separate returns merged into one bright primary return, sitting at FL 290, directly under FedEx 417 Heavy. I was reaching for the transmit key when the FedEx crew came up on frequency. Cleveland, FedEx 417 Heavy, we're getting a TCAS RA. Descending. My hand stopped. TCAS RA, the collision avoidance system telling the crew to change altitude. Right now, no questions. FedEx 417 Heavy, roger the RA. Say altitude leaving. 350 in Cleveland, TCAS is showing traffic below us, multiple targets. It's showing 6. The transmission cut. Not faded, cut, like someone had pulled the plug. I sat there for 4 seconds, which is an eternity in ATC, staring at the scope. The merged return was still there, one bright dot under the FedEx data block. Then, on the next sweep, it split. 6 returns, radiating outward from the center point, sliding back into position. The hexagon reformed. Perfect spacing. 14 miles. The rotation resumed, 3 degrees per sweep. Clockwise, like nothing had happened. The FedEx crew came back on frequency. The captain's voice was different, flatter, controlled in a way that told me he was working very hard to keep it controlled. Cleveland, FedEx 417 Heavy, canceling the RA. Traffic no longer a factor. We're, requesting direct Erie, direct destination. FedEx 417 Heavy, cleared direct Erie, direct destination. Direct Erie, direct destination. FedEx 417 Heavy. He didn't mention the 6 targets, didn't ask what was below them, didn't file a report on frequency. He just wanted out of the airspace. I didn't blame him. Gary was standing behind me. He hadn't moved. I could hear him breathing. Gary, yeah, what do I do with this? He didn't answer. The hexagon kept turning. The hexagon kept turning for another 31 minutes. I worked my other traffic around it, gave wide vectors to a UPS 767, told a Delta repositioning flight to expect a reroute, cited unidentified traffic, area avoidance recommended. The Delta captain took the vector without follow-up questions. Gary stayed behind me. Neither of us said much. 6 dots, perfect hexagon, rotating, both ARSR4 sites painting it. The host computer logging every sweep. It was real. At 3 feet 4, the hexagon began to descend. All 6 targets, same rate. I watched the returns shift on the ARSR4's elevation cut, dropping through FL 290, FL 280, FL 270. The geometry held, the rotation continued. They were descending in formation, the entire hexagonal structure sinking through the flight levels like something being lowered on cables. FL 250, FL 200. They passed through the lake effect layer, that bright smear on the scope, and descended right through it. Didn't scatter, didn't merge with the precipitation. Clean returns. FL 150, FL 100. I was gripping the console edge, the old trackball housing under my left thumb, the strip bay metal cutting into my forearm. Dry mouth, that nothing taste. FL 050. 5,000 feet over Lake Erie. The surface was down there, 37-degree water, 3-foot swells, November darkness. 5,000 feet above that, 6 primary returns were turning in a perfect hexagon, descending at 1,500 feet per minute. FL 20, 2,000 feet. The surface return was visible now, Lake Erie's radar reflection. The 6 targets were almost touching it, then they merged. Not all at once. In sequence, clockwise, matching the rotation. The first target touched the surface return and disappeared. Half a sweep later, the second, then the third, fourth, fifth. The 6th one paused. One sweep, it was there, a single dot alone, the last point of a hexagon that no longer existed. Next sweep, it touched the surface return. Gone. I stared at the scope for 10 minutes. The sweep went around and around. Lake Erie was empty. Just weather returns and the surface line, and nothing at FL 290, and nothing at any altitude, and the scope was clean. Gary straightened up. Called the Coast Guard sector in Cleveland. Any surface vessels in central Lake Erie, roughly 40 miles north-northwest of Sandusky? No. Any distress signals? No. He came back, stood behind me again. I'm writing it up as anomalous propagation, he said. Gary, 6 intermittent primary returns, weather-related false targets. That's what the scope showed. The scope showed a hexagonal formation rotating at 3 degrees per sweep for 47 minutes, descending in unison and reacting to traffic 6,000 feet above it. The scope showed anomalous propagation. I looked at him. He looked at me. There was nothing in his eyes that suggested he believed what he was saying, but there was nothing in his voice that left room for argument. I turned back to the scope. The report went in the next morning. 6 intermittent primary returns attributed to anomalous propagation, weather-related. No further action. 3 weeks later, I was in the facility library pulling NOTAM archives for a training project. Unrelated. I found the file because it was in the wrong drawer. 164th Tactical Fighter Squadron, Ohio Air National Guard. Incident report, November 14, 1966. 6 F-84F Thunderstreaks. Night formation training sortie over central Lake Erie. The flight departed Rickenbacker at 21:15 EST, proceeded to the training area, 40 miles north-northwest of Sandusky, and entered a snow squall at 29,000 feet. Flight lead, a Major Denning, transmitted at 21:47. Cleveland, Buckeye Flight, 6 ship, flight level 290, IMC, spatial disorientation, requesting vectors to Rickenbacker. That was the last transmission. All 6 aircraft were lost. The Air Force searched for 9 days. They found 2 aircraft on the lake floor. Tail numbers confirmed, in a debris field consistent with controlled flight into terrain or controlled flight into water. The other 4 were never found. The briefed formation spacing for the 164th's tactical exercises was listed on page 3 of the incident report. I read it twice to make sure. 14 nautical miles. Hexagonal. I closed the file, put it back in the wrong drawer, drove home, pulled over on Route 2 near the lake, and sat in my car. The lake was out there in the dark, flat and black and cold. The date of my shift, the night of the hexagon, was November 14th, 2004. 38 years to the night. I worked the lake sectors for 3 more years. Every November overnight, I'd watch the scope over central Lake Erie. Count the primary returns. Look for patterns. They never came back. I retired in 2007. Sold the house near the facility, moved downstate, bought a place that doesn't have a view of the lake. I don't fly anymore. Gave up my private ticket in '08. Couldn't tell you exactly why. Something about altitude, maybe. The recorder's still running, red lights on. I should probably stop. 6 dots, 14 miles apart. 38 years under the water, and they still remembered the formation.